We're now joined by parliamentary reporter for the Toronto Star, Tonda MacCharles, and Joël-Denis Bellavance, who is the Ottawa bureau chief for La Presse. It's been so long. Nice to see both of you.
In person.
In person and after the winter break. Tonda, going into actually the winter break, there was a speculation, the talk that 2023 might actually become an election year. But so much has happened since Parliament left and has returned. Bad economic forecasts, challenges that the Trudeau Liberals are facing in terms of policy. How real is the possibility of a vote in 2023?
I think it's more remote now because a lot of the economists and the Liberal cabinet heard this last week are predicting, quite a slowdown in the first part of the year, if not a mild recession in Canada. And no government wants to go to any poll with that picture facing them. So it's going to be a challenging governing year for the Liberals. They have to deliver, I think, on some of the promises with the NDP under that deal. They've already got dental care underway. They have to make more steps on that front. Pharmacare will be another piece. And Jagmeet Singh is holding their feet to the fire on health care. But look, that's also going to be resolved. But honestly, I think the economic challenge of making sure Canadians feel confident about their economic prospects and their household budgets and managing the difficulties of inflation and high interest rates, that's a huge governing challenge for them this year. But I don't see an election right now. The polls certainly wouldn't lead them to call one.
Yeah, well, let's talk about that, because there are these pitfalls for the government, because as Tonda was outlining, here we have the NDP holding the Liberals' feet to the fire when it comes to certainly pharmacare, the provinces asking for more money with Medicare, but at the same time, you have the Bank of Canada essentially warning us that the economic times ahead are going to be rough. So talk to us about the pitfalls that the Trudeau Liberals face going into this year.
Well, we'll have a test pretty soon, which will be the federal budget. The NDP has said that they want some new measures in the federal budget, and this will be a test for the confidence agreement they have with the Liberal government. And then Tonda talked about pharmacare. I would add to that unemployment insurance program. They want some reforms in that, make it a little bit more flexible if people lose their job. But for sure, this is going to be a test. But I also agree with Tonda. There's no confluence of interest within the three opposition parties to defeat the government. And the Prime Minister, Trudeau, has said that he doesn't want an election in 2023. And this time, I do believe that he's saying the truth about that. There's no interest for anybody to go to the polls this year.
Still, though, this is, with or without an election, 2023 will be very important, at the very least, in terms of building or perhaps tearing away at the government's reputation. Talk to us a bit of the challenge here, because, again, there are all these huge financial demands and program demands on being made of the government. But at the same time, we know, as we heard from Chrystia Freeland, that the cupboard is bare.
Well, look, the cupboard's not entirely bare. I mean, they still have room to borrow if they need to finance some things, some targeted measures. But I think that increasingly, one of the things the government is challenged by is to show Canadians that government works, that their services are delivered, that government, big government, this is a big government, Liberal governing party, and they believe in it, and they've tried to insist that Canadians have seen through the pandemic how government can be a source of good and help people through hard times. If there's a looming recession, we'll be able to target the needy. But they've struggled to deliver on frontline services that they're responsible for, whether it is, passports, whether it is, I think more broadly speaking, just being quick on the uptake to get things done. Immigration is a big one. There's backlogs in immigration. There's backlogs all over the place. So that's a big piece of the puzzle for them. They have to go into, if they want to go into an election year, having shown some economic management skills, they also have to show some basic competency skills. And I think right now they're challenged by that. They don't have a good rep.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Since the Liberals came to power in 2015, they've been consumed by international events. Donald Trump arrived, we had the pandemic, the war in Ukraine, so they put a little less probably efforts into the domestic issues. Now it's coming back and biting them on the tail, so they have to show some competence in delivering the goods for Canadians, as Tonda mentioned.
And it's not just services, frontline services like a passport or accepting people as permanent residents. It's even things like, dealing with issues like medical assistance in dying, like get it done. get those things through. Gun control is another huge issue for them. They have messed up the rollout of a big signature promise from the campaign, which was to deal with assault-style weapons, handgun bans and assault-style weapons. It's a disaster, that legislative initiative. And it's also angered people who otherwise would be their partners in either the Bloc or the NDP on gun control. So, you know, I think that they have to step up and be better.
Well, you know, one other potential pitfall, and this comes out of your interview you had with the Prime Minister, because you spent a lot of time talking to him about the notwithstanding clause, which of course he said to you that he was considering bringing it to the Supreme Court to perhaps define when it can and cannot be used, which has earned him some pushback in Quebec from the Quebec Premier. Given how important the province is for this government and its hold on power, how is that issue playing out for Trudeau?
Well, surprisingly, when I wrote that story, I got a lot of emails from readers. The usual suspects were decrying what Mr. Trudeau was saying, but others were more reflective about it. And I think Mr. Trudeau marked some points. People who reflect upon the issues, you know, in a very profound way will come to the same conclusion as the Prime Minister. That is that the notwithstanding clause is being trivialized. We finally find the correct version in English, because Mr. Trudeau used the word banalisation in French, and it's trivializing in English. And I think he scored a lot of points, political points on that issue. And I don't think that his arguments can be countered properly by the Coalition Avenir Québec government in Quebec. They could not argue on the basis of what Mr. Trudeau argued. And sooner or later, that affair, that issue will be going to the Supreme Court, whether it's a reference or Bill 21, you know, on laïcité in Quebec. And that we're expecting a decision on the Court of Appeal this spring, which means that tôt ou tard, as we say, it will be in front of the Supreme Court of Canada.
And it's not just an issue for Quebec any longer, and I think that's why Trudeau's scoring points with it, right? Like it became a very big issue in Ontario when Doug Ford suggested he would opt out of the Charter of Rights for legislating, you know, against strikers. It's not just an issue for Ontario; it's also an issue. What would Premier Daniel Smith, do with that clause in Alberta, trying to opt out of federal legislation? So, look, I think suddenly Trudeau, you know, and arguably he should have stepped up earlier and staked a claim on that. But what he's trying to do is say these things should, in a democracy, be legislated by parliaments, be litigated in courts, a decision rendered on courts, and then you go back and decide, okay, given that decision, then we should opt out. But if you're going to say, we're just not going to get involved in this, we're just going to completely exempt our legislation from any judicial review, that's not on.
And Michael, if I may say quickly, Mr. Trudeau made a point that no leader made before. He said he's worried that it could be used with the rise of populism in some areas of the world. Would the populist government come to power and use it in a very bad way, like we've seen with Doug Ford in Ontario? So Mr. Trudeau, I think, explained it properly, his thinking. And you mentioned that I had an interview with him. We spent a third of the interview on the notwithstanding clause. So, notwithstanding other subjects, that should have been raised.
as I read in the final piece. Listen, we're quickly running out of time here, but you know, as we talk about the challenges that still lie before this government, I think we need to spend a little bit of time as well talking about Pierre Poilievre, because the Conservatives, according to the latest polls, they are leading right now by a few points over the Liberals. Talk to me about what you make of Pierre Poilievre's argument and the kind of traction it's getting across the country.
Well, he's being smart politically to take a line that has some resonance right now. The line that everything feels broken is having some resonance given some of the things we talked about in terms of the challenges of delivering services. It's exaggerated, it's hyperbole, but it works as a political message. But it's interesting to me that he's got a kind of somewhat single-minded focus on inflation and interest rates to the detriment of the Conservatives' presence on other issues. You don't hear them talking about Canada-US relations. We don't have a clue what they're going to do on the environment and climate change, nor do we have a clue about what they really think about the privatization or the potential slippery slope towards privatization of healthcare. They're absent on those issues. So politically, messaging-wise, it's smart, it's catchy, it kind of appeals to people. But, you know, I note that, you know, the Conservatives as a party are higher than the Liberals in the polls right now, but Mr. Poilievre's own negatives are also way down and are I guess his negatives are up. People are disapproving of him in the same way, much so that they are of Prime Minister Trudeau right now. He's also struggling. Personally, the two men are rubbing Canadians wrong, but their parties, the reflection in the party's approval shows the Conservatives are doing something right.
Joël-Denis, you got a minute here.
Yeah,
Oh, sorry.
No,
It's all good. It's all good.
I think Mr. Poilievre has decided that the ballot question will be the economy and the rise of cost of living. And the way he frames it, he's trying to woo supporters, traditional supporters of the NDP or center-right liberals by talking about the cost of living, the rent, the cost of buying groceries, filling up your car. It's everyday daily life of issues that Canadians are facing with. So he's trying to broaden the tent in a way by focusing on the economy and the cost of living. We'll see if it pays off in the next federal election.
Okay, well, we have just started, so we are watching very, very closely. I loved how you cringe at that. But for now, Tonda, Joël-Denis, really nice to have you both back in studio. Thank you for this.
So nice to be back.
Nice to be back.